Hello and welcome back to Bits and Bobs. Today's video is the complete coinage guide of all of the United Kingdom coins. So, as you know, the UK was formed in 1707, and since then there have been many monarchs and many eras of British coinage. Today's video will go through every single monarch and the coinage that was used in their reign. And so we will begin with the coinage of the first ever monarch of the whole United Kingdom, which was of course Queen Anne. And from her reign, move onwards throughout the reigns right up until the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, when British coins were decimalised, and therefore ending the United Kingdom's pre-decimal coinage. So, without any further ado, let's begin and jump into it. Today's video is the complete coinage of Queen Anne. We will be going through every single type of coin minted under the reign of Queen Anne, going in denomination order from lowest denomination to highest. So the lowest denomination issued in the reign of Queen Anne was the farthing. Now the farthing was only released as a patent coin. That means none went into circulation, and this is because during the reign of her predecessor, William III, and before this, there was a massive influx of production of farthings and halfpennies, and so farthings were barely needed at all, and so none were made for the entirety of Queen Anne's reign. This patent coin was released though, and is now a very rare and valuable coin, worth about £1,000 for a Queen Anne farthing. As you can see here, it features the classic design of Britannia, facing the other way to some later designs, holding a staff rather than a trident, the word Britannia around her, and of course the shield to her side. The obverse here lets us have our first look at the portrait of Queen Anne. She has a left-facing bust and is uncrowned in all of her portraits, with her hair up and in a bun. She is featured wearing a little bit of clothing, so the portrait doesn't cut off around her neck, as it does for some monarchs, and around her is a small and simple legend, Anne di Gratia, Anne by the grace of God. There's also some milling around her. Now then, moving on to the halfpenny. Once again, there are no halfpennies minted for circulation, only patents, for the reason I already said. Now this is a patent halfpenny, and is a very interesting design. Not only because it doesn't match the farthing, and usually farthings and halfpennies have the same design right up to the 1930s, but because there is no words or no date on the coin, and it looks almost more like a token, simply featuring a lovely design of the national flowers of the UK. And this is of course because the UK was formed during the reign of Queen Anne in the Act of Union 1707. The obverse is very detailed here, with a lot of detail in her hair and clothing, as well as a more extended legend with a sort of full list of her titles. Now then, we'll move on to a coin which did circulate. The lowest denomination circulating in Queen Anne's reign was the penny. This here is a penny from the reign of Queen Anne. Up until around 1800, there were still silver pennies circulating rather than copper pennies or brass pennies. Here is the design, very reminiscent of a Maundy coin, with the Roman numeral style 1 and the crown on top, with the date either side of that. The obverse here features another portrait of Queen Anne, this time with a brooch on her front of her clothing, but a similar sort of style with her hair up in a bun, facing to the left, and the legend the same. Now then, swerving slightly from circulating coins, we'll go on to Maundy coins now, and here is the Maundy coins. Very recognisable with the 1, 2, 3 and 4, this time in letters rather than sort of Roman numerals or interlocking letters. We have a 1, 2, 3 and 4 pence as usual, with varying sizes of course, made of sterling silver. These all featured the portrait of Queen Anne, this one we've just seen, that we see on the penny. Now there's a further link between these, as the 2 pence here, which we move on to, was not just a Maundy coin, there was a Maundy issue, but the circulating 2 pence had the exact same design, both obverse and reverse, as the Maundy one. The 3 pence coin was a circulating coin, but this also had the exact same design as the Maundy one on obverse and reverse. The 4 pence, you've guessed it, had the exact same design on the reverse and obverse as the Maundy. This makes it hard to tell these days if you have a circulating or Maundy Queen Anne coin of a lower denomination. Speaking of denominations, we now move on to the 6 pence. Here are a few obverses of a 6 pence. You can see there are a few changes, very subtle changes. You may need to pause and have a closer look. Changes to the obverse, that is, but the reverse, as we see here, stayed the same, this design for all the 6 pences of Queen Anne. We see a lovely design here with 4 crowned cruciform shields. We have the Harp of Ireland and Lilies of France on the left and right, and at the top and bottom are a split shield, 2 of them, with the 3 Lions of England and Lion Rampant of Scotland sharing 2 shields as well, with the legend around and the date at the top, split over the top crown. Between these shields is also a legend. This reads in English, Queen of Great Britain, France and Ireland, and the Latin there is abbreviated to fit in the gaps. Now then, moving on to another higher denomination, we move on to the shilling. Now here is the obverse of the shilling, the same obverse that is on the 6 pence. However, the obverse is not the only thing shared design-wise, as the shilling has the exact same design as the 6 pence. The only way to tell them apart, of course, being the size. Now, of course, there were no florins minted in the reign of Queen Anne, as they were first introduced in Victoria's reign in 1849. Now we'll move on to the half crown. The half crown is a lovely coin, featuring the obverse here we've seen once before, and all the half crowns in Anne's reign. But there are two reverse designs. This is the first one, and you may well recognise it, as it is the same design as the sixpence and shilling, the four crowned cruciform shields about a garter star in the middle. However, the design is the same on the later versions, but there's been more detail added. We see here on the opposite sides two roses of England and the lilies of France. This really bulks out the design, making it very busy and very beautiful. Especially on the big canvas of the half crown, that would be a great coin to look at in person. Speaking of a big canvas, we now move on to the crown, the biggest silver coin. And the design here is this one once again. Now there were no roses or French lilies added to this one, and it's simply just the crowned cruciform shields about the garter star. A lovely design. It is worth mentioning on some of the bigger Queen Anne coins you can find a few mint marks, the Vigo or the E being for Edinburgh. These little mint marks and varieties are also just fun to collect on the silver coins of Queen Anne. But no more silver, as we've seen. We're now moving on to the half guinea, the first gold coin, the lowest denomination gold coin of Queen Anne's reign. This is the first design. There are two designs. The portrait changes a little bit, very minor change to her portrait as usual. The reverse design features four cruciform crowned shields about a rose in the middle with the sceptres in between. The second design though, if we look to the reverse design, we still see the shields still crowned with the sceptres in between. Rather than a rose in the middle, it is now a garter star. A cheeky little change. And looking to the left, we can see some slight changes to the portrait of Queen Anne, slightly aged portrait there, the second portrait. Now then, moving on to the guinea, the 1 guinea piece from the reign of Queen Anne. The same design features on the reverse. This is a first issue type, you can tell this by the rose in the middle rather than a garter star, which all the sceptres and shields point to. Now then we see the second design. That second portrait of Queen Anne is there once again, and the centre design is rather than a rose, we see the garter star making a return there. Now then, we will move on to the double guinea, the highest circulating denomination in the reign of Queen Anne. And once again it features this design. There were none minted in the earlier parts, so they all have the garter star, as the rose design would have been phased out by the time they started minting these. The quintuple guinea was made, also known as the 5 guinea piece. They were not made for circulation or not made in any large quantity, but there are some out there, and they're now very expensive. But they still feature this same design with the rose this time, as all the 5 guineas were minted in the early parts of her reign. So there we go. Please do comment down below your favourite Queen Anne coin. And so there we go, the first coins used in the UK. Moving on now to the next monarch, that was of course George I. Let's have a look at his coinage. So here we go, King George I, second monarch and the first king of the UK. He reigned from 1714 to 1727. So as always with the other monarchs, let's go through his coinage, going in denomination order once again, with the smallest to the largest. Starting off with the farthing. And here we have the George I farthing, a 1717 example. The design of this time shows Lady Britannia on her shield there, with a spear in her hand and the branch of leaves in her other hand. She faces to the left, with the date below her and legend around. The legend simply reading Britannia, of course the country sort of name, and of course for her herself, Lady Britannia. We have a rim around the coin, and what's known as a large flan around the obverse and reverse of the coin. Moving to the obverse, we can see here a portrait of King George I. He faces to the right, with a laureate in hair and clothing featuring on his bust, cutting off at the shoulders rather than the neck. Once again we have a strong circular border around his portrait, and beading around the edge to prevent the coin from being clipped. Here is the first, younger bust. The bust was aged, as we can see here. The aged head of King George I is very similar, as is the legend, but we can see there a larger flan added to the later, larger coinage of the older bust of King George I. So there's the farthing. Now looking very similar, we have the halfpenny. In fact, the same design was used for the halfpenny as on the farthing, with the same portrait and the same reverse design, with the Lady Britannia to the reverse, struck on this lovely copper coin, and to the obverse, King George I. The legend though, however, just says George King, King George, as there had only been one King George. There's no need yet to number him as the first, as it was not known that at that time there'd be more to come. And now moving on to the penny, the first of the silver denominations, we can see it here. A very small design reminiscent of some more Maundy coinage style designs, with the numeral there in Roman numerals I for 1, the lovely crown to the top, and the date to the top of that. Around the edge we can see the legend in Latin and milling around the rim. So a lot of detail there to a very small coin, which weighs less than 1 gram for this very small silver penny. Moving to the obverse, we can see here a portrait, of course, of George I. Full legend here says Georgivus de Gra, George by the grace of God, and once again we have his right-facing bust with quite long hair and a laureate in his hair. All the lower value silver coins were done in the Maundy style, although they all circulated. We can see here the 1, 2, 3 and 4 pence having the very same design there, with only the number and the size of the coin changing, with the number 1, 2, 3 or 4, with the crown above each coin and the date at the top of that, then legend around. So a simple standard design there for the 1, 2, 3 and 4 pence. There are Maundy coins of course as well, as circulating coins, Maundy coins and circulating coins sharing the same designs for this era of coinage of the UK. Moving now on to the next highest denomination of George I, the 6 pence, we can see it here, and a lovely design indeed. We have 4 crowned shields about a central garter star. The top shield has the 3 lions of England and the unicorn of Scotland sharing a shield. To the left is the shield of Hanover, to the bottom the shield of Ireland, and to the right the 3 lilies of France, the fleur-de-lis for France. We have a legend around, and then there's the SSC between the shields, standing for the South Sea Company. To the obverse we have of course the portrait of King George I, a more detailed bust now, with a larger coin to have more detail on the die. He has again a laureate in his hair, long hair and a draped bust, with a longer legend as we can see, much more abbreviation in the legend, of course therefore much more meaning behind the wording around the legend, and although over 300 years old, a lovely design done by hand there back in the early 1700s. Moving now on to the shilling coin, worth 12 pence or 2 sixpences, we can see the design here. A very similar design, with once again the 4 crowned shields. We have then a legend around, but rather than the SSC for the South Sea Company, we have 2 opposite roses for England and 2 fleur-de-lis for France, as at this time England still claimed land in France, although it was not at that time actually ruled by England, but it was still on the coins, ruled by, and then sort of in essence ruled by England. Moving to the obverse of this coin, we can see there the same portrait of King George I and the 6 pence on the bust of the coin. For later issues of the reign of King George I, his shillings bore the same design as the 6 pence piece, so the only way to tell the 6 pence apart from the shilling was of course the size, as then for the end of his reign, the shilling and 6 pence shared the same design to both obverse and reverse of the coin. So there we go. Now as you know there are no florins at this point in time, so we move now straight on to the half crown. Let's have a look at the half crown George I design. And here it is. And you may well recognise it, as it is a very similar, if not exactly the same design. We have the classic crowned shields around the central garter star, and this one has the legend around of course and the date at the top, with this one having the 2 roses there and the 2 fleur-de-lis for the earlier part of King George I's reign, and again there the portrait of King George I to the obverse. And the SSC was never added to this coin, or just on the half crown, just having the rose and fleur-de-lis. Moving now on to the crown, a lovely piece of 40 grams worth of silver, back in the day a true beauty to behold, and of course still today. And here we have the design. And you may well recognise it as it is the same design. A bit lazy if you ask me for the George I design team at the Royal Mint. But we have here again the 4 crowned shields with the central garter star, and then the legend around with SSC to the centres of the shields, and to the top here the date for this one, 1723. A lovely design, but in my opinion overused. Moving now on to the quarter guinea, a very small gold denomination. We have it here, and a similar design theme I must say, with 4 crowned shields around a central garter star. However, there's no SSC or no roses and fleur-de-lis. It is here we have the 4 sceptres of the throne. We have the sceptres there, 2 of them with the royal orb for England. To the top left is the harp of Ireland can be seen to the sceptre for Ireland, and the thistle for Scotland on the other one. The obverse has a new portrait, a new gold portrait for King George I, cutting off higher up his bust with no clothing being able to be seen, cutting off at the neck, but again having long hair and a laureate on his bust with a legend around. Moving on to the half guinea, of course worth 2 quarter guineas, and here we have the design. We can see here the same reverse design has been used, but a new first bust and earlier bust for George I for the earlier half guineas, but then for the later half guineas, the same portrait can be seen there, as was struck onto the quarter guineas. The only quarter guineas made had that same design. There are 2 busts of King George I to find on the half guinea. Moving on now to the full guinea, of course worth 2 half guineas and 4 quarter guineas, we have here the same design. 4 crowned shields around a central garter star with sceptres between, and that same bust of King George I to the obverse. Moving on to the double guinea, can you guess the design? That's right, 4 crowned shields around a central garter star. So a lovely design team at the Royal Mint. They did a great job at this time with some lovely, truly lovely designs, but as I said before, they were definitely overused in my opinion, and more variety was added to it, as we can see here on the 5 guinea, the same design. A lovely coin, again 40 grams of gold this time, a beautiful coin indeed, but the same design needed to be changed in my opinion. Speaking of change, the monarch changed in 1727, moving on to George II's coinage, let's go. Today's video is the complete coinage of George II, who reigned between 1727 and 1760, so a fair few years for lots of coins to be minted. Let's take a look. We will be going in denomination order, starting with the lowest denomination, which is the farthing, as we see now. This one is from 1730 and the date is at the bottom. Above the date is a portrait of Lady Britannia. She is holding a sprig of leaves, a staff and the shield as usual. And the words Britannia can be seen around her, along with the milling, as this is a milled coin and people can't clip off the metal content, the copper, to keep for themselves and profit on. The obverse of this coin features of course the portrait of George II. George II was an uncrowned left-facing monarch on the portraits, but in this one he is wearing a laureate or wreath crown. The legend of this reads Georgivus II Rex, which means George II King. Now onto the halfpenny. The same metal and design, but it was twice the weight. There are a few more leaves on the sprig of leaves that Britannia is holding, which is the one difference, and of course the date is different for different dates. And here we see the words again, Britannia, with her portrait, the same. The obverse of the halfpenny is exactly the same as the obverse of the farthing, just a little bit bigger for the bigger planchet. Now then, there were no pennies minted, or no pennies for circulation minted, during the reign of George II. The only pennies were these kind. You may recognise it, and that's right, it is a Maundy penny. Even back then it had a very similar design to the ones of more modern times, with the number, crowned, the date either side of the crown, and the legend around this. The obverse of these Maundy pennies featured a different portrait of George II, very similar with the laureate still and the clothes, but he's wearing more draped clothing, and there is a lion on his shoulder if you look very carefully. Now then, all the Maundy coins had the same obverse design as you can see, and pretty much the same design on the reverse, obviously with the number and size changing being the only real difference of these Maundy coins. Now it is worth noting all silver coins, including the Maundy coins, were minted out of sterling silver in this time. In this time also the threepence was also a circulating coin as well as being a Maundy coin. The circulating and Maundy threepences both had the same design, so it's hard to tell them apart. Now interestingly, the fourpence was also a circulating coin, or the groat, and it too featured the same as the Maundy design. Now then, here we see a George II sixpence. This coin has a lovely design with the 4 shields which are crowned. At the top we see the 3 lions of England and the lion rampant of Scotland in one shield. Then to the left is the royal Hanoverian shield, as George II was a Hanoverian king. At the bottom is the island and French lilies on the right. This is the portrait of George II used in this coin, and you can see it is again slightly different to some of the other coins, although it's very similar with the clothing at the bottom and the laureate in his hair. Now then, we'll move on to shillings, and this is a beautiful design of shilling. The same underlying design as the sixpence, but you can see there are roses and French lilies added in the gaps of the 4 quartered arms. This is known as the roses and plume design and was used on the first type of shillings from George II. This design was done before the sixpences were minted in this reign, and we see a younger portrait of George II feature on the obverse. A few years later the portrait was aged to this aged version, and it was in this time as well that the first sixpences of George II were minted, so they had that design. When the aged head came out, they simplified the design of the shilling to match the sixpence. Now then, there were no florins minted in the reign of George II as they were first introduced in 1849, almost 100 years in the future of this time, but there were half crowns, and here we see one. This half crown features the same design as the early shillings, with the quartered arms and the roses and French lilies. And once again, this coin features the younger portrait of George II on the obverse for this design, but around that same time period as changing the design, the half crown too had a change on both reverse and obverse. The reverse lost some of the detail with the roses and French lilies once again disappearing to this design, and the obverse, that's it, you guessed it, changed to the aged head. This one notice says Lima underneath. Some coins from George II's reign did say that. Coins with the Lima mark on were made from silver captured in battle with the Spanish, and was used as kind of propaganda for coinage at the time to say, you know, we've defeated these enemies and stolen their treasure, basically, and made it into our own coinage. Now then, the gold coinage of George II is very exciting. We start off with the lowest denomination of gold coin at the time, which was the half guinea. Here we see it. The portrait of George II is once again a slightly different design, this time featuring less of his shoulders and body, and no clothing obviously as it doesn't go down that far, but he's still wearing a laureate. The reverse design features a lovely interpretation of the royal quartered arms shield, with the crown above, the date each side of the crown, and the legend around. There was also a second variety of half guinea, and here we see it now. The reverse remains unchanged apart from the date, but the obverse once again has featuring an older portrait of George II, but still with no shoulders in view. Now the guinea at the time was exactly the same as the half guinea. There's the first one, there's the second one, the same design, but of course a bigger coin by twice the weight because it's twice the amount of gold. Twice again was the double guinea. The double guinea was a lovely coin to have, but it still featured the same design as we see here, and at the same dates as the other smaller coins, the portrait on the obverse changed to the aged head. And here we see the 5 guinea piece. The 5 guinea piece is a huge coin, the biggest gold coin to ever circulate, weighing over 40 grams of gold, and is a beauty. and still has the same design on. So all the guineas feature the same design, you would tell them apart by their size. And one last portrait of George II for the video. This is the one-off design used only on 5 guinea pieces and features the initials below EIC. And here it is. This is the first issue farthing, minted between 1760 and 1799. Notice Britannia is not holding a trident, just a staff, in the design. The obverse of this design features this portrait of King George III. This is the next farthing, the second issue, only minted in 1799, and the word farthing features underneath a new portrait of Britannia on the reverse, and there's a new obverse portrait of George III as well. This is the third issue. They only made it in a couple of years, and these are the last years in George III's when the farthing was minted, and yet another design of Britannia. Next up is halfpennies that shared the exact same design through the exact same years, obverse and reverse, apart from the 1799 design. Once again, 1799 was only a one-off design year, and here it is for the halfpenny. It doesn't say halfpenny on it though, like the farthing said farthing on it. Next up is the penny. The penny had always been a silver coin up until 1797 when the first copper penny was released. Here it is, known as the cartwheel penny. Though circulating until 1860, that design was a one-off year. This is the new design, style and shape of penny that was used until the end of the reign of George III, but remained legal tender until 1860. The same year the cartwheel penny was released, the cartwheel 2p was released. It was twice the weight, but featured the same design and style on the obverse and reverse. It holds the record for the largest circulating coin in Britain. Now for some silver. First up is the 3p, and here it is. This is the first issue, minted between 1760 and 1816. It features a crowned 3 with the date at the top. Here's the second issue, the same design, but the date is now on the obverse. This was minted between 1817 and 1920, and here's the obverse featuring the date under the portrait of George III. Now for 6p. Here's the first issue, minted between 1760 and 1816. It featured 4 shields with crowns, featuring the emblems and insignias and royal shields of the dynasties at the time. The obverse featured this portrait of George III, a favourite among collectors. Next up is the second issue 6p, minted between 1816 and 1820. It features a crowned royal shield with a Hanoverian shield inside and a garter surrounding both shields. Next up are the George III shillings, which you may recognise the designs. That's right, same designs, same years and same obverses, just like the 6p. Same for the shillings. At this time, British soldiers carried round shillings in their pockets to have the King's portrait with them while on active duty, so these shillings are known as the King's shillings and have been probably taken to war. The next denomination up is the half crown, and here is the first issue half crown, minted between 1816 and 1818. It features a super intricate detailed design. So let's take a zoom in here, and we can see the hearts around the unicorn of Scotland, the greyhound and the horses at the bottom, and even a little crown right in the very centre. This coin also features the bullhead portrait of George III on the obverse. Then comes this design, the second issue minted between 1818 and 1820. A similar design, just less detail, with one of the layers of detail being removed and the words or the legend on the edge being larger. This coin also features a different obverse portrait. The last silver denomination is the crown. This design features a gartered George and the Dragon sovereign style design, also seen on later Victorian crowns, and on the obverse it features the same portrait as the one we saw on the later half crowns. And now for the most interesting and varied type of George III coins, the gold coins. We start off with the quarter guinea, only minted in 1762. It's the same diameter as a silver 3p, but heavier because it's gold, and it features a crowned shield on the reverse design. A quarter of a guinea was equivalent to 5 shillings and 3p, and back in the day that was the equivalent of about £60 in today's money, so not a bad coin to have in your pocket. Another good coin to have in your pocket would be the 1/3 guinea, with a value of a third of a guinea. It features a crown in the middle and the date at the bottom with a legend around the outside, and it's slightly heavier than the quarter guinea. The obverse features this portrait of George III, which is known as the long neck portrait. There was a second issue of the 3rd guinea, and here it is, similar design, but the date is now under the crown rather than being at the bottom of the coin. The obverse has also changed to this portrait, which is even less flattering, if you ask me. Next up is the half guinea with a value of half a guinea. When it was first released, it had the same design as the quarter guinea had, but it was twice the weight. You may be more familiar with the second issue design. That's right, it's the spade shield design. A crown shield, but more pointed and tapered at the end, getting the name the spade shield design. And the obverse had this new portrait of George III on it. The half guinea even got a 3rd issue, and here it is. Quite a cool design. A crowned garter featuring a shield and a Hanoverian shield inside, with a date under that and the legend around the sides. It makes the coin look quite big, so that must have been an intricate design on a small coin, although it was perhaps ruined with this portrait on the obverse. And now for a highly collected coin, the golden guinea. When it was first released, it had this design on the reverse and this portrait on the obverse, but It then got a second issue with the same design on the reverse, but a new obverse design, that one there as we just saw. But it was then, in 1885, given the crowned spade shield design. Spade shield guineas, very collectible coins. The spade design was used until the end of the golden guinea. Next up is the 2 guinea piece. None were needed for circulation, though they did make this one, featuring that classic design on the reverse, with a special portrait for collectors on the obverse. It was only struck as a proof coin though, so none entered circulation. Guineas were demonetised in 1816, and a new coin was brought in, the gold sovereign. Although it had been used in the 1400s, it was brought back now as a milled coin. So first up is the half sovereign, and here it is, featuring a crowned royal shield with a Hanoverian shield inside, and a legend outside. This design was used on the few years of George III half sovereigns. The obverse featured this portrait of George III, one of his better ones. Next up then, it's the gold sovereign, and I'm sure you recognise this design. Once again we see the Benedetto Petrucci George and the Dragon design. This design has a garter on the outside though, and the obverse once again features this portrait of George III. In today's video, we're going to be going through the complete coinage of George IV, who reigned from 1820 to 1830. We're going to be going in denomination order, starting off with the farthing, the smallest coin used in Britain at this time. And here is the first issue farthing. We see a very intricate portrait of Britannia holding the sprig of leaves, that's on the shield, and the Lion of England at her feet. On the obverse we see King George IV. This is the first bust of King George IV, and notice he is wearing a wreath crown and some clothing over his shoulders at the bottom of the portrait. Now the second issue farthing features the same design of Britannia, just without the leaves or the lion by her feet, although there are the flowers of the different constituent parts of the UK at the bottom. On the obverse we see here the portrait of George IV. Now on to the second iteration. Notice the clothing is gone from the bottom of his neck, and the wreath or laurel crown is a little bit less prominent. This is the only design of halfpenny from that time, as none were minted in the few years of the first portrait. They all feature the second portrait and the new design on the reverse as well, featuring no Lion of England or leaves in Britannia's hand. And the halfpenny weighs twice as much as the farthing, so they can all be weighed, as does the penny, which weighs twice the halfpenny, 4 times the farthing, and again features the same design as none were minted in the early times of the first portrait. They all feature the second portrait and the new iteration on the reverse. Next, on to silver coins. Here we start off with the Maundy coinage. George IV was the first king to feature on the obverse of the new standardised Maundy coins, the designs we see here and recognise. Notice on the 3p his portrait is a lot smaller in proportion to the others. That's because of course the 3p did circulate, and so at this time his portrait was smaller on the Maundy coins to distinguish a Maundy from a circulation coin, something that only happened in his reign. So that means we can look at the obverse of this 3p and know that it is a circulation type, as the portrait is quite big, almost touching the sides of the coin, whereas if it was smaller it would be the Maundy issue. And now onto 6p. This lovely and intricate design features a floral royal shield with the Hanoverian shield inside. Both shields are crowned and there are floral emblems around the side. And the first portrait of King George IV is seen on the obverse. This is the second type 6p, and we see a more uniform shield with the Hanoverian shield inside again. The royal garter and the date also feature on this coin. The obverses, as I said, do feature the first portrait of George IV, although the clothing has been removed on these designs of the 6p. There is also a third design of 6p, and here it is. We see a crowned Lion of England facing out of the coin, standing on the St Edward's crown above the flowers of each part of the UK, with a legend around, and this coin features the second portrait of George IV, with no laurel crown and of course no clothing visible for the portrait. Now on to shillings. Here is the first design of shilling, which you recognise. Here is the second design of shilling, which you also recognise. And now you might guess it, here is the third design of shilling. The shillings and the 6p featured the exact same design, the only difference being the shillings were bigger and twice the weight. There are no George IV florins minted. As you know, the godless florin struck in 1849 was the first milled florin, and so that was after the time of George IV, who had no florins struck in his reign. Now we move on to half crowns. There are 3 designs, all of them are lovely in my opinion. Here is the first one. A crowned royal shield can be seen with the Hanoverian shield too, a garter and floral emblems at the outside with George the Dragon at the bottom. This one features the first portrait of George IV. The second design is here. It is the same design minted onto the 6p and shilling, but of course on the half crown it will be much bigger and very, very nice to see all the lovely and intricate details struck onto this beautiful coin. And of course the obverse here still features the first portrait of George IV. And now onto my favourite coin, the George IV third type half crown. Here we see a lovely rendition of the Royal Shield of Arms with lots of flowers and emblems around it and the Latin banner at the bottom. This coin features the second portrait of George IV on the obverse and the date under the King's portrait. And now onto crowns, the largest silver denomination struck at this time. These coins feature the classic Benedetto Petrucci George and the Dragon design, seen on sovereigns and crowns alike over a very long time. And this coin features the first portrait of George IV, a number minted in the latter part of his reign. And so now we will move on to the gold coinage of George IV. Starting with this, the first issue half sovereign. This is a design that was not minted very much, and you may have never seen this design on half sovereigns, as it is a very rare type. We see another design of the royal shield with the Hanoverian shield inside and the date at the outside. And on the portrait of this one, we see the first portrait by Benedetto Pesciucci once again. Here is the second issue half sovereign, and again you may not recognise the design as it was only minted for a few years in this time period. We see a crowned royal shield with the Hanoverian shield inside, the date outside, and the flowers at the bottom. It looks very uniform and tidy, making it an attractive coin. Next up is the third issue half sovereign, this time featuring the second portrait of George IV and a new design for the royal shield, featuring some ornamentation on the outside, but of course the St Edward's crown at the top, and the legend is around the outside. So, now on to the gold sovereign. First up we see this design, a classic by Benedetto Pesciucci. We've already seen this one in the video, but this time it's on the sovereign. This is one from 1821 and features the first head of George IV, as we see here, which was also designed by Benedetto Pesciucci, so he designed both sides. The portrait was changed in 1825 to the second portrait, as was the reverse design, to the same ornamentation shield on the outside with the crown on top as the half sovereign, making them have the same design in the latter part of George IV's reign. And now on to the bigger gold coins. Here we see an 1823 double sovereign coin. The double sovereign did feature the Benedetto Pesciucci George and the Dragon design on the reverse, the classic for all sovereigns. But breaking news, the portrait of George IV on the obverse was a different one we hadn't seen before, and only features on the double sovereign. I don't know why this special portrait was used on only the double sovereign, but it does make for interesting collecting. And now on to the 5 sovereign piece. This lovely design is very worthy of a zoom in, to see this intricate design of the royal shield behind the royal cloak, crowned with so much detail of lions and crowns and royal emblems that it would take an hour to talk about this lovely design. Today's video is the complete guide to the coinage of William IV. He reigned from the latter part of 1830 right up to the start of 1837, so a short reign, but still many wonderful coins minted during this time. We'll start off with the smallest denomination, the farthing, and build our way up to the silver and gold coins, so stay around. Here is the farthing, featuring Britannia, sat on the shield holding a trident with the floral emblems below her. On the obverse is the portrait of William IV by William Wyan. This is the only portrait ever used of King William IV in his short reign. He's featured facing to the right and uncrowned. Here we see him again on the halfpenny. The halfpenny has the exact same design as the farthing, and it's just twice the weight. And lastly, the penny in the copper series of coins. These coins were actually made of copper, and they were very big compared to the copper coins of today. For instance, the 1p coin we see here was the same size as a half crown. Speaking of half crowns, now we'll move on to the silver coinage of William IV. Starting off with the Maundy coins. Here we see an example of a Maundy 4p to show you the design of the Maundy coins. As usual, it was the crown above the number with a date each side and the wreath around the sides of the coin. Nothing special there. And of course the 3p, featuring the same design, was also a circulation coin, and as you can see they were well used during this time period and were a beloved little denomination. Moving up the denominations now, we now see a circulating 4p, also known as a groat. Rather than featuring the crowned 4, we see Britannia here, noting that this is a circulation 4p rather than the Maundy one. The date is at the bottom. Moving up again, we now move on to the 6p coin. This classic design by Jean-Baptiste Merlin was used on tons of coins for tons of monarchs over tons of years. We see the word 6p in the middle, the St Edward's crown at the top. Surrounding the design are 2 branches of leaves tied together at the bottom, and under this knot is the date, in this case 1834 for this coin. A lovely design. So lovely in fact, it was also used on the 1 shilling coin. Notice it's the exact same design, and in this case the same date. The only thing that's changed is obviously in the middle it now says 1 shilling rather than 6p, as this coin is a bigger coin, obviously having a different value, which is 1 shilling. No florins were minted under the reign of William IV. This is because the florin was first minted in a milled form in 1849, and by this time William had been long dead and it was now into the Victorian era. So now we'll move on to the half-crown coin, and here we see the William IV half-crown design. This is the only design used, but it makes sense not to change it, as this is a lovely, lovely design. In fact, it's my favourite design on a silver coin. There's so much going on, from crown shields within crown shields, the royal cloak tied up with lovely tassels, St George and the Dragon at the bottom, and the date there as well, with the Latin anno word for date, beside the numbers showing the date, in this case 1834. A lovely coin. And now we'll take the opportunity on this bigger silver coin to have a look at William IV's portrait in lovely sterling silver. And here it is, and you can also see the WW under his neck, standing for William Wyan, the designer. This is the crown coin, and once again features the same design, but just imagine this lovely, intricate design on a gigantic coin such as the crown in lovely condition on sterling silver, a true beauty to use in change, and I definitely would keep one if I got one in my change. Speaking about beautiful coins, we're now onto the gold coins. Here we see a William IV half sovereign. The reverse of this coin features a crowned Hanoverian shield inside the royal shield, which is also crowned, with lots of stylization and embolization around the shield as well. And the date at the bottom also says Anno and 1832 for this coin, with milling all over it so no one can shave any of the gold off, trying to make a profit on these coins, as they are milled coins. The clue is in the name. This design was used on all the half sovereigns in William IV's reign, although there was a change, as we can see here on this 1835 example. Now the same design is used, but it is smaller within the coin, taking up less space and leaving more of an empty space around the outside. With one next to it to compare, the best way to tell is looking at the top of the shield and seeing the arms that reach out either side and seeing how close they reach to the rim. On the left, there's still quite a big gap, but on the right, they're quite close to the side of the coin. So then, this design was also used on the gold sovereign, and here we see a gold sovereign from 1832, featuring the same design as the half sovereign. The only way to tell them apart was, of course, the size, meaning one was worth £1 and one was worth £0.5. This is a double sovereign, featuring the same design as on that half crown. It is a terrible image here, but it is the only image I could find, as these coins are incredibly scarce, only minted in the 1 year for the proof sets, so they're quite hard to come by. There are no 5 sovereigns minted, so they even are harder to come by, as they have a mintage of 0. Here is every coin minted under William IV, from the Maundy to the copper, the silver, and the gold. Some lovely examples of William IV coinage. Today we're going to be talking about every single type of coin minted in the reign of Queen Victoria, from copper to gold. Queen Victoria certainly ruled for a while, and there were many coin types during that time. But let's start with the half farthing. Minted between 1842 and 1856, this was the only design used. On the obverse was the young head portrait of Queen Victoria. Next up is the farthing. This is the first type, minted between 1837 and 1860. Notice Britannia on the reverse of this design. Twice the weight of the half farthing, the farthing featured on the obverse a slightly different young head portrait of Queen Victoria, with the date on the obverse as well. This is the second issue of farthing, minted between 1860 and 1894. We now see the word farthing on the top on the reverse and Britannia, and on the obverse is another young head bun portrait of Queen Victoria. And finally the third issue farthing, from 1895 to 1901, the same weight as the second issue, but now the veiled head portrait on the obverse. Up until 1860, all the designs of the copper coins were the same. Here it is. The only difference was the size and the weight. The weight was proportionate to denomination, and here on the screen you can see all the weights and diameters of these coins up until 1860. The post-1860 designs of the halfpenny and penny were also the same as the farthing, just a different wording around the rim, obviously for the different denominations. And here is the weights and diameters again for these coins, featuring the same obverses as well. The obverse change dates were the same across all denominations right up to the veiled head. And now time for some silver. First up is the threepence. The reverse design for this coin stayed the same throughout the whole of Queen Victoria's reign, but there are 3 obverses to discuss. First is the young head portrait, then in 1887 the Jubilee head portrait lasting till 1893 when they changed it to the veiled head portrait, and they're the 3 obverses to look out for. Next up is the sixpence, weighing twice as much as the threepence as you'd expect. A fairly simple design here they used up until 1886 on the first issue sixpence, as well as using the young head portrait of Queen Victoria. For the Golden Jubilee year, the design was changed to this, featuring a royal shield in a garter, also featuring a Jubilee head of Queen Victoria. But after the Jubilee couple of years, in 1893, they changed it back to the classical design with the veiled head though. Next up is the first issue shilling, also lasting until 1886, with a very similar design, only the wording in the centre changed. And, when they changed it for the Jubilee year, changed to the same design, just obviously on a bigger coin. But afterwards, for 1893, a new design was brought in, featuring 3 shields and a garter, this one lasting till the end of Queen Victoria's reign in 1901. And the veiled head was brought in after 1893. Next up is a brand new denomination introduced in Queen Victoria's reign. First minted in 1849, this is the florin, 1/10 of a pound. Having a beautiful design on the reverse, it didn't go down too well for the public, because on the obverse there was no reference to God. Nicknamed the Godless Florin, it was only minted for 1 year. Featuring the same weight, a similar design, and a completely new diameter, the florin was back in 1851, lasting till 1886. The Gothic florin now featured references to God on the obverse, and the public loved it. But, as with all denominations, it got a facelift in 1887, this time featuring 4 crowned shields and sceptres, lasting till 1893 as usual, when a new design was brought in, this one with 3 shields instead of 4, and sceptres still with crowns. And after the Jubilee head, the veiled head was brought in until the end. Now we come to the half crown. Here's the first issue lasting until 1887, featuring a crowned shield with the floral wreath around the side of the shield. This featured the young head portrait of Queen Victoria, on all these dates. For the Jubilee, the design was changed to this: a royal shield inside some garters with floral emblems and a little George and the Dragon at the bottom. The weight and diameter staying the same, of course. But in 1893, a new design was brought in, as always: the spade shield for the half crown here, and as always, the veiled head on the obverse. And next up is another new denomination introduced in Victorian times, the double florin. Only minted for 4 years, first in 1887 to commemorate the Golden Jubilee, has the same design as the florin through these years. In fact, it looks exactly the same as a florin, but it's just double. The full crown was only minted in 2 years, featuring the young Victoria portrait, 1844 and 1845. It was a little while until 1847, when they released only 8,000 of the Gothic crown, a very rare and valuable coin, but it was an even longer wait until 1887, when the Benedetto Petrucci George and the Dragon design adorns the crown right up until 1900. And the ones made after 1893 obviously have the veiled head. Now for the gold coins. First up is the half sovereign. So here's the first design, used up until 1869, featuring a crowned shield, and on the obverse is the young head portrait of Queen Victoria. The design was slightly changed in 1869, giving a bit of a facelift to the coin, up until 1887, when, as usual for the Jubilee year, things were changed up. Although not that much for the half sovereign, the main difference being the date now on the reverse, and of course, the Jubilee head on the obverse. And then in 1893, the design was changed to this. Benedetto Petrucci's classic George and the Dragon design was now on the half sovereign, with the veiled head on the obverse. Next up is the sovereign. So here's the first issue, featuring the same design as the half sovereign when it was first introduced, including the young head Victoria on the obverse. But in 1872, George and the Dragon came onto the sovereign, earlier than for the half sovereign. And now the date was on the reverse, the obverse was a dateless portrait of Queen Victoria. We then have the third issue, featuring the classical Jubilee head between these dates. And as by now you may have guessed, after 1893, yeah, you guessed it, the veiled head was on the obverse until she died. Next up is the double sovereign, made for the first time in Victoria's reign in 1887. We see it here in all its glory, and for 1887 the obverse is the Jubilee head. It was made again only once more in 1893, just so we could have, that's right, the veiled head on a double sovereign. Then it's the gold 5 sovereign, weighing 40 grams, having a diameter of 38 millimeters, only made in the same 2 dates with the same obverse variations. Today's video is the complete coinage of Edward VII, where we'll be looking at every single coin minted under the reign of Edward VII, from starting with the lowest denomination right up to the highest denomination. So, let's begin. The lowest denomination in Britain at the time was the farthing, worth 1/4 of a penny, and here it is. It features the date at the bottom and the word farthing at the top, and features the Portrait of Britannia by Leonard Charles Wyon. The obverse of the coin was designed by George William de Soules, and features the portrait of Edward VII. This is his first and only portrait, featuring him looking to the right and is uncrowned. Around his portrait is the legend, and we'll come back to the portrait on a bigger coin to have a look at more of the details. Next up is the halfpenny, twice the farthing and half the penny. Again, it features the Leonard Charles Wyon design of Britannia, the date at the bottom, and this time the words halfpenny, as it's a halfpenny rather than a farthing. The obverse is the same, and we can take this chance to look at the hair of Edward VII. A lot of people think Edward VII was bald on the coins, but you can see very closely there are some details of his hair, and of course his beard and moustache. Next up is the 1 penny coin. Again, for the third time, the same design by Leonard Charles Wyon, and the date at the bottom, this time saying 1 penny, as the denomination is. And again, the obverse features this usual portrait of Edward VII. Now on to the silver coins, starting off with the Maundy issues. The 1, 2, 3 and 4 pence of the Maundy feature the usual design with the number, with the date either side, the crown on top, and the wreath around it. The obverse of these coins look like this, similar but a couple of abbreviated Latin words rather than the full Latin words are here, for instance DG and FD, which would be De Gratia Fide Defender. Now of course the Maundy didn't circulate, but the 3 pence had a circulating variant, as we see here. The design though is exactly the same as the ones that were in Maundy sets, although these ones are minted by the millions and used in day-to-day currency and change, so it is often hard to tell if it's a Maundy coin or a just circulating 3 pence. Next up is a 6 pence, twice the denomination. We can see the words here, 6 pence, in the middle of the design, giving us the denomination. The bottom features the date and the tying knot of the 2 wreaths around the sides, with the St Edward's crown at the top of the coin. This design was first introduced in the reign of William IV and was used for a long time throughout coinage. On the obverse again we see the portrait of Edward VII, a standard obviously on all of his coins, as he only had this one portrait. You can see here on the legend though the De Grat and Fid Def are longer rather than just the 2 first letters. And now we move on to the shilling, twice the 6 pence. The design then features the words Fid Def in dimp at the top and the words 1 shilling at the bottom. The date, 1902 in this case, can be seen either side of the St Edward's crown, and atop the St Edward's crown is a crowned Line of England facing out of the coin. A very nice design that was also used for quite a while, even as the metal content changed in the shillings. And the obverse, as you've come to expect, is again this, Edward VII Digra Brit Om Rex, but this one doesn't have the Fid Def, as like I said, that one was on the reverse of the coin as we saw at the top of the legend, so it's slightly different on that case. Now on to the 1 florin coin, a favourite among collectors in Edward VII's era. This one features the standing Britannia design, where she is seen holding the trident and shield, her clothes blowing in the sea breeze with the sea behind her as Britannia rules the waves. She's also wearing the Roman helmet. Either side of this is the 1 florin and 2 shillings. This is the denomination, as 2 shillings is 1 florin. And finally, the date, in this case 1904, can be seen just under Britannia. The obverse, of course, features the George William II's portrait of Edward VII, and the full legend is on this side, because none of it is on the reverse this time. And now we move up a denomination once again. The next denomination is the half crown, as we see here. A busy design. Fid Def in DIMP is on the reverse again, the denomination half crown at the bottom, as is the date, 1908 in this case. The central design features the Royal Court Arms shield with the St Edward's crown atop it, and around this is a inscribed garter with a Latin inscription on as well. This design was done by George William de Sulz, the person who also did the obverse, and was used well into the reign of George V, because it's a good design. And here we see the obverse once again, featuring the usual portrait of Edward VII, as again, the shortened legend as some was on the reverse. And now the last and biggest silver coin is, of course, the crown. This one features the usual and classic portrait of St George slaying the dragon by Benedetto Pastucci. This design was used on crowns in the reign of Queen Victoria and was carried over to her son, Edward VII's coinage. These were very large coins, almost an ounce of silver, and featuring a large planchet to show the design very well. And of course, the obverse is equally big, featuring a very large and very cool portrait of Edward VII, with the full legend on the obverse, as no words are on the reverse, apart from the date. So that's all the silver coins, and now we'll move on to the gold coins of Edward VII. First up is the half sovereign, worth £0.50. This coin also features the same design, George slaying the dragon by Benedetto Pastucci, with the date in the same place of course. This one is a 1906 half sovereign, and you can see the coin is much smaller, with the design being smaller and less detailed, as it is only a 19.3mm coin. Although the obverse of the coin does still feature some lovely portrait detailing of Edward VII, with the usual legend we've come to know. And now we move on to one of the more iconic coins, which is the gold sovereign. This coin was the first coin to ever feature this design by Benedetto Pastucci, and still does in the reign of Edward VII, as we see here. And the obverse again features the same design with the legend, and I think looks very cool struck onto a gold coin. So, next up is the double sovereign, which once again features the design by Benedetto Pastucci, but there is a way to tell this one apart. If you look at the date, the numbers are all much closer together than they would be on a half sovereign or a sovereign. So even if you can't see the size like there, you can tell that's a double sovereign as the date is closer together. And again, the portrait, it looks very detailed and nice on a bigger coin with the full legend around on the obverse of the coin. Very nice. Only one denomination to go now, one with lots of prestige, and that is the quintuple or £5 sovereign. And here it is. The design of George and the Dragon doesn't quite fill up as much as the coin as they do on some of the other coins, but it is still bigger as this is a humongous coin. Notice once again the date is more spread out as usual, and the obverse features the portrait of Edward VII. A quintuple sovereign weighs 40 grams and is a huge piece of gold. Today's video is the complete guide to the coinage of George V. His reign lasted between 1910 and 1936, so lots of coins in between to learn about today. We're going to be going in denomination order, starting from the earliest version of that coin. The smallest denomination in George V times was the farthing, worth 1/4 of a penny, and here we see it on screen now. It was designed by Leonard Charles Wyon, and you'll recognise the design because it's also on the halfpenny and penny we'll see later. Obviously the word farthing appears on this coin, and it's different obviously for the different denominations. The coin is 20mm wide and made out of a copper alloy, with the majority being copper. On the obverse of the coin we see the portrait of George V. This is the one and only portrait used on circulating coins in Britain during his reign. It was designed by Bertram McKennell, whose initials you can see under the king's neck. The king is featured facing left, without a crown, as usual. Now, we move on to the halfpenny. Once again we see here this design of Britannia, designed by Leonard Charles Wyon, the only change being halfpenny on the coin. And now, 1 penny on the coin. These old penny coins are a classic and favourite among collectors, and of course are the third and final coin in the copper series to feature this portrait, as all coppers did back then. And now we move on to silvers. The Maundy coins featured the usual design for the 1, 2, 3 and 4 pence. That is a good segue onto the 3 pence piece though, a coin that saw a lot of change during this time. In the early days it featured this, the usual design that was used on Maundy coins. In 1920 the first change happened, as it was made now 50% silver as opposed to sterling. This happened to all silver coins in 1920. The design change came in 1927, and here we see one in 1930, after the design has changed now to 3 acorns, 3 oak leaves, the words 3 pence, and 1930 at the bottom. Now onto the sixpence. Here is the first design, featuring a crowned lion on top of a crown, the St Edward's crown, which the date is split either side. This was also changed in 1927 to this design, now featuring 6 acorns and 6 oak leaves and the words 6 pence, and of course the date 1930 at the bottom. And now onto the shilling. This looks and is the same design as the sixpence, obviously with the word 1 shilling being instead of 6 pence. This also changed in 1927, but to this design, featuring a crowned lion on the crown, St Edward's crown, with the date and denomination underneath and the legend around the top. Now we move on to the florin. Once again, here is the first design we see, with the royal sceptres in between the royal shields that are crowned with a garter star in the middle and the date at the bottom. This was also changed in 1927 to this design. Looking very similar, notice the shields aren't crowned anymore, but the royal sceptres are. There's a big G in the middle, and the legend is a bit more detailed. Moving up a denomination once again, we now see the half crown, and here we see a crowned royal shield with the garter around and the legend right around the outside with the date at the bottom. Once again, 1927 saw a design change, and here it is. The shield has now been squashed in a sort of concave shield with the royal cipher crowned each side and the legend around. Now we move on to crowns. First up is the wreath crown, and we see an example here on screen. These were only minted during Christmas time as a collector's item, and so are very rare and never entered circulation. Now, we here at Bits and Bobs have already made a video all about the wreath crown. Why are they so rare and valuable? So if you'd like to learn more about the wreath crowns, watch that video after this one to learn more. As I say, these ones didn't circulate, so the only circulating coin was not the wreath crown, but another design that circulated. And that design was of course the 1935 Silver Jubilee crown, as we see here. We also know this coin as the rocking horse crown, as it does look a bit like the rider is on a rocking horse, although the design was personally approved by George V for his jubilee that year. It is a sort of Art Deco revival design, as the dragon looks very stylized rather than how we'd imagine dragons to look if they were actually real, like on the sovereign, for instance, depicts it. Speaking of sovereigns, now we move on to the gold coins, and here we see once again George and the Dragon. This classic design by George and the Dragon was done by Benedetto Petrucci, as much of you know, and this design was used on all the half-sovereigns of George V's reign, and also on the sovereigns of George V's reign. Here we see a later example, and the design has not changed on the half-sovereigns or sovereigns. This classic George and the Dragon design was on all the coins of George V. The double sovereign also featured the same design, although the double sovereign in these years was only released in proof, and so is rarer obviously as it didn't circulate. And the last gold coin is of course the 5 sovereign, a very very rare piece from the reign of George V. George V's 5 sovereigns were only released in proof as the double sovereigns were, and of course that means they're very rare. In today's video we're going to have a look at the extremely rare coins of Edward VIII. Now these coins we're going to go through and have a look at each one, the rarity and the value of the coins. Now they're all rare as of course Edward VIII abdicated, only reigning between January and December of the same year in 1936, so less than a year on the throne. And due to this he had no circulating coinage struck. All that exists are an extremely rare handful of patterns and test coins from back in the day when they're testing coins but never actually made any. So needless to say, they're all very rare. So let's begin with the farthing, the smallest denomination, and then work our way up. So here is the previous design of farthing before Edward VIII, and it has the recognisable design of Lady Britannia there on the reverse of the farthing. But the new design proposed for Edward VIII was this, a wren on the farthing, the design that was eventually then used for George VI after Edward VIII. So you can see a 1937 date to the top as they're all ready for the next year, as their patterns ready for the next year to be struck, but of course he wasn't king then so they never were. So you have the date to the top, the wren, and then the words farthing to the bottom giving the value, and the portrait of Edward VIII there to the obverse, facing to the left. Now the mintage or known examples for this coin are unknown. Nobody knows how many are out there. The value is also unknown as they don't really sell, but an estimate placed by collectors and experts is around £35,000 for this farthing, so an extremely rare farthing, and of course an extremely valuable farthing. We'll now move on to the halfpenny piece, the next highest denomination, and here is the design before. This is a George V one from 1936, with having again Britannia to the reverse. Now the new design proposed for Edward VIII was this one here, featuring the golden hind to the reverse, and once again was then still used but for the coinage of George VI coming afterwards. Now an interesting fact on the portrait of the obverse there, he faces to the left, although he should face to the right, as with tradition, but he was too vain, but luckily never had any circulating coins made, so did not break the rule. Now for this halfpenny there are 3 examples known, just 3 known, giving it a value estimate of around £65,000. £100,000 plus. So needless to say once again, only 3 examples, an extraordinarily rare halfpenny with a huge price, and even some catalogues like mine just say it's extremely rare and impossible to value. That's how rare this coin is, and now we'll move on to the penny, a popular pre-decimal denomination. Now for this one, we have here the design before, again with the Britannia on the reverse, but unlike the other two, the reverse design did not change and remained as Britannia on the reverse of the penny. And you can see here an Edward VIII one, a very rare example, held by the Royal Collection Trust, with the date there to the bottom of 1937, as like I say, they were getting ready for that year to mint coins, but never actually had to, and most of these patterns and proofs were melted down, meaning they're all very rare, only a few survived, and again lots of coin books don't know the price or mintage, can only guess at a few of these things, as it's just so rare. Now luckily for us, one did sell quite recently at an American auction for a whopping $163,000, which is £133,000 for an extremely rare Edward VIII penny. So we got a value for that one, but a vintage is still unknown. And now onto the 3p. We see here one from 1936, the year before. Then we have the 3 oak leaves and the 3 acorns on this coin. Pretty cool design. Now here is the proposed design for Edward VIII, a different design to what was actually used and what came before. We have 3 interlocked rings there. These are the rings of St Edmund, and to me they look like signet rings, so a cool design with legend around and 3 rings in the middle, designed by George Kruger Gray, and then the portrait there of Edward VIII, which was done by Humphrey Paget, but of course never actually used. So a cool design for this proposed coin. Now, this is known mintage roughly of between 4 and 8, so there are 4 to 8 examples of this coin in the world today, so a very rare coin, with a value estimated of around £30,000 to £50,000 for this coin, so a huge value for a very rare 3p that was never actually minted, and only a few patterns exist, commanding this high price. Now a few trial pieces as well were struck for the new coin, the new brass 12-sided 3p. We see here one with a little border around the thrift plants in the centre, and as a later design, the one was actually used with no border. These new coins were planned to be released under Edward VIII, but then were later of course introduced under George VI, as by 1937, of course, he was then king. Now these coins have a known mintage. There is exactly 3 of each known, so 3 of the first type and 3 of the second type, 6 overall of these extremely rare trial 3p. We can see some information in the book of a few past listings and sellings, and a current estimate for price would be around £40,000 plus. So again, an absolutely huge price for these coins. And now we'll move on to the 6p piece, and this is the design before. Again, we have the similar to the 3p, we have this time 6 oak leaves and 6 acorns and 6 branches, as is the 6p. And with the same sort of style, we then have 6 signet rings, or 6 rings of St Edmund here. So we have 6 interlocked rings, a very cool design there. A shame it was not used, but cool to see nonetheless on this rare trial pattern piece of a design that was never came to be by George Kruger Gray. You can see KG there to the bottom, who actually designed the design that was used, but also designed this one that wasn't used. Now this has a mintage of around 3 to 4, so about 3 or 4 exist, or 3 or 4 are known to exist, so, obviously very, very rare, and the value of this coin is around £50,000 to £75,000. So as I mentioned, Edward VIII coins are extremely, extremely valuable, whatever the coin, whatever the condition. And we'll now move on to the shilling, the next highest denomination. Here is the George V shilling, and there was only one design, not any English or Scottish varieties, 2 types from 1 year, only one design from 1 year with no varieties. However, that was planned to change under Edward VIII, as a new style, the new Scottish shilling was going to be introduced. Now they didn't actually get on to striking any English ones, they planned to have both, but only a few Scottish ones exist and were struck from Edward VIII. The design once again was carried over to George VI, you might recognise it there, but was used with his portrait rather than Edward VIII, meaning Edward VIII ones, only Scottish ones exist and are very, very rare. Around again with the 6p, 3 to 4 are known, so just a handful of them known, and a similar value estimation of around £50,000 to £70,000 for these coins. So just a true, extremely rare coin from this controversial time for the monarchy. Now then, on to the florin, and here we see the design before, with 4 crowns, 4 sceptres, 4 shields, a lot of 4s, with legend around and a G in the middle. Now here is the proposed design for Edward VIII, that was eventually used once again for George VI. We have the crowned rose, and the thistle and shamrock either side, with legend around, and the portrait of Edward VIII to the obverse. So a cool coin, and would have been struck from 0.500 silver, so half silver, as with all these coins, as they have not been debased further to no silver yet at this time. It is recorded that around 3 to 4 examples are known of this coin, and it says here in the book that it is very expensive with no value estimation, and the best estimate we can find is around again similar to £50,000 to £75,000 for this coin at an auction, were to sell to a high-end collector looking to get a very rare coin for their collection. And now we'll move on to the half crown. Here is the previous design, I'm sure you'll know, with the concave quartered royal shield, and here is the proposed design for Edward VIII. Now this is my favourite actually. We have a flag there, a flagpole waving the Royal Standard Flag, the Royal Standard Flag having 4 parts of course, 2 with the 3 lions of England, the Harp of Ireland to the bottom left, and the Lion Rampant of Scotland to the top right. A unique design and my favourite of the Edward VIII coinage. Now this is an ultra rare coin and expected to fetch around £200,000 when next at auction, and it is one of only 6 still known to exist, so very rare as with all these coins. Now on to the largest and last silver denomination. It is the crown, and here we can see the Edward VIII crown. Now you may recognise the design here as the design that was going to be used for his coronation was then used for George VI's coronation. So as with the coronation crown, we have there the crowned royal quartered shield with the Lion of England, the unicorn of Scotland, and the banners below, making it a cool design overall, and again with the portrait of Edward VIII as the obverse there, a very similar portrait to George VI actually. Now this coin is a mintage of around 4 to 5, so again just a few handful of examples exist, only 4 or 5 are known in the whole world. This one was at an auction recently and it was lot 1272 with a starting price of 120,000 USD, and the price realized it sold for 300,000 US dollars. So that is extremely valuable. There was no half sovereigns made, so we'll go into the sovereign next, and here it is, a true beauty and rarity of the coin. The same design, of course, you cannot change that, the Benedetto Vespucci George and the Dragon, with then the portrait of Edward VIII to the obverse of the coin, as of course with all his coinage, done by Humphrey Paget, and was left facing, although it should have been right. The mintage of this coin is again similar to the crown, only 4 or 5 known, to just once more a handful of examples, only a few coins for the whole world. Now a few years ago this coin broke the record for the highest valued British coin, being sold to a private collector for £1 million British pounds. £1 million for a coin, a very high price. But that record did not last very long, as the quintuple sovereign, there was no double sovereign, then sold for even higher. So here we have the highest denomination and the highest valued Edward VIII coin. An absolutely lovely piece, 40 grams of gold, from a controversial time of the monarchy, great design, great history, extreme rarity, but how rare? Well, only 2 exist. Just 2 examples for the whole world of this coin exist, leading this coin to sell for $2.28 million, smashing the record for a British coin sold at auction. That is an absolutely huge price, and in pounds that is 1.824 million, so 1,824,000, money that could have been spent on so many things, but was spent on a British coin from Edward VIII's reign. So there we go. Today's video is the complete guide to the coinage of George VI. So, we're going to be going in chronological order and denomination order. However, the first thing we'll cover is the portrait of George VI, which is on the obverse, or the head side, of all of the coins in his reign. This is the only portrait he used, and it was designed by Humphrey Paget. We see the king facing to the left, and he is uncrowned on all of his coins. So, let's begin. Firstly, as I say, we'll be going denomination order. However, just before we get into that, we'll show you the Maundy coins. And here they are, the 4, 3, 2 and 1 pence coin, all featuring the same design, obviously with a different number, and the king's portrait on the obverse of each of the coins. These coins were not minted for circulation, and they are more of a collectible item by this point in history, as they are not given out to the poor anymore. Now then, starting off with the farthing, here we see the design. The obverse, as expected, features the portrait of George VI, and the reverse features this, the portrait of the Wren. This was first brought in on George VI coinage in 1937, and that was the first year of his reign and the first year of this design. The date is at the top and changes every year, obviously, and the denomination farthing at the bottom. The Wren is featured looking left. On the obverse of the coins, as said, we can see the portrait of George VI. However, there are 2 legend inscriptions on these farthings. This one, notice, says Ind Imp, but on this one, the Ind Imp is not there. That's because this coin was minted after 1948, when the Ind Imp title was removed as he was no longer Emperor of India. And now we move on to the halfpenny. Here is the design of a George VI halfpenny. Once again, in 1937, the design was changed, corresponding with his start of his reign, to this boat design. This boat design was also done by Humphrey Paget, who designed both sides of this coin. The ship featured is the Golden Hind, and was the flagship in Sir Francis Drake's fleet. The denomination halfpennies at the top, and the date, in this case 1937, at the bottom. Moving on to the penny. Again we see the obverse says Ind Imp, and for all 3 of these denominations, that was removed after 1948, when George VI was no longer Emperor of India, as they were given independence. Now, the penny was the only one of the 3 copper denominations that didn't get changed the design when George VI began his reign. In fact, it kept this time-honoured and classic tradition of having Britannia on the penny. This particular example was designed by Leonard Charles Wyon, son of William Wyon, who was son of Charles Wyon, a family of Royal Mint engravers. And now we move on to the silver coins. First up is the silver 3 pence. The obverse doesn't say Ind Imp, as that is on the reverse of all of the designs, and this didn't need changing or removing because this coin was only minted up until 1944. Here we see the last year of 3 pence, silver 3 pence, minted under George VI. And this is the example. To see the design, we feature the English cross on a shield embedded in an English rose with a legend around the date either side of the main design, designed by George Kruger Gray. We also see the denomination 3p at the bottom. Now, in 1937, at the beginning of George VI's reign, this new coin was brought out. This was the first ever non-round coin. It was made of brass and had 12 sides. The obverse once again features the portrait of George VI with the words Ind Imp that were removed after 1948, and the reverse features 3 exotic-looking flowers with the words 3p and the date at the bottom, obviously in this case 1937, being the first year this new denomination was released, and was becoming increasingly more popular than the small fiddly silver 3p, which is why they were removed in 1944. Moving on to the 6p, and here it is. We can see George VI's royal cipher in the middle, crowned under the St Edward's crown. The denomination 6p is at the bottom, and the legend at the top. This was also designed by George Kruger Gray. However, the design would have to be changed because the Ind Imp was on there. So rather than just removing it, the 6p got a whole new redesign, with now another royal cipher of George VI, still crowned with a smaller crown this time, the date either side again, and the Ind Imp omitted from the reverse, as I said, he was no longer Emperor of India. The designs on the obverses of all of the silver coins remain the same, which is this, the portrait of George VI, and as it doesn't say Ind Imp, there was no design changes throughout his whole reign. Moving now on to the shilling, and here is the first issue shilling. Again, you can see the Ind Imp on the design, which is why it would have to change. But we see a lion facing outwards of the design, stood on top of the St Edward's crown. In 1937, the first ever Scottish shilling was issued. They were still struck in London at the Royal Mint, but featured a new design with the Scottish flag and thistle on the design, as well as the lion in a different position on the crown, holding a sword and sceptre. For the rest of the shilling's life, there were always 2 types, the English and the Scottish design. Here we see the English design after the Ind Imp has been omitted. The English roses either side of the words 1 shilling have also been removed. And here is the Scottish version after the Ind Imp has been removed. There is no other design changes other than the words Ind Imp being omitted from the reverse. Now we move on to the 2 shilling or florin coin, and here is the first coin, yet again by George Kruger Gray, who designed almost every coin for George VI's reign. Again, Ind Imp is on the reverse, and this was removed, along with the initials of George Kruger Gray. I don't know why that was, but he still designed the design as it is the same, just without the Ind Imp on the coin from 1949, 50 and 51 on these coins. Now on to the half crown. The half crown was once again designed by George Kruger Gray, and his initials, KG, can be seen under the shield. Now look there, and they're gone, as well as the Ind Imp being omitted. For some reason, when the Ind Imp was removed, which of course made sense, his initials of the designer were also removed, and this didn't make as much sense. Now on to the crown. Here we see the coronation crown of George VI. Only minted in 1937, as that was his only coronation, this design was released into circulation as a commemoration of his coronation as king. This is the obverse of the second crown minted under the reign of George VI. The legend is slightly different to any other coins, and at the bottom it has the denomination 5 shillings, which is the crown denomination at the bottom. On the reverse we see the design classically now known as the Benedetto Pestrucci George and the Dragon design, with the date 1951 being under this coin, as that's when it was struck, to commemorate the Festival of Britain. In 1937 the half, full, double and 5 sovereign were struck, only 5,001 were made, and this was to mark the coronation of George VI. This was the only time sovereigns or any gold coins were struck under the reign of George VI, as by this point they didn't circulate. Today's video we're going to be going through the complete pre-decimal coinage of Queen Elizabeth II. These coins are in production between 1953 and 1971 when decimalisation happened. We're going to go in denomination order, starting with the smallest denomination, the farthing. So let's begin. Here is the first design of farthing minted under the reign of Elizabeth II, and it features the date above a wren above the word farthing, giving the denomination. This design was done by William Gardner and carried across from the George VI farthings. Here is the obverse of the 1953 farthing, and we can see the first portrait of Elizabeth II, done by Mary Gillick. The Queen is featured facing to the right, wearing no crown, but a laureate in her hair. There is a second obverse design for this farthing. Note the one to the left, the 53, has the words Brit Om to the bottom left of the Queen's neck. That then is removed from all other farthings, and no longer says the reverse design stayed the same. Now then, moving on to the halfpenny coin, one denomination up. The halfpenny has this design here by Humphrey Paget, and once again was carried across from the George VI halfpennies when it was introduced. The design features the Golden Hind, the flagship vessel of Sir Francis Drake's fleet, the words halfpenny to the top, giving the denomination, and the date to the bottom, indicating which year it was made. Moving to the obverse here of 53, you can see that in the legend it has the Brit Om, and of all other years it has no Brit Om. This is a reoccurring trend, as the Brit on the obverse was only released in the 53 coins and then removed on all the other denominations, as we'll see going forward. Now to the penny. So here is a 1953 penny, the first year of Elizabeth II, with the usual design of Britannia there by Leonard Charles Wyon, the 1 penny to either side and the date below. And as I've said, as I've warned you, on the obverse of 53 we'll have the Brit in the legend, which stands for All the Britons, Queen of all the Britons. After being removed, the legend just read Queen rather than Queen of all the Britons. Between 1953 and 1961, no pennies were made, but as they resumed production, of course, after 1953, the obverse then featured the legend, as I said, just saying Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen. Now then, moving up to another type of coin, to another composition coin, the threepence. Only the brass threepence was made, there were no silver ones being produced, and this design has a brand new design to the ones used in George VI's reign. A crowned portcullis design, date at the bottom, and the word threepence giving us the denomination to each side. This was also designed by William Gardner. The obverse, of course, of the 1953 has the Brit on it, and the 54 and onwards has the De Gratia Regina, with no Brit on. Now then, a quick detour into the Maundy coins of Elizabeth II. Here we see them here with the usual designs. The 1, 2, 3 and 4, crowned, date either side, and laureate wreath around. The standard design and sizes since the reign of George IV. We can see, of course, now the addition of the new portrait in this year, 53, of Elizabeth II, and the Mary Gillick portrait was used right until the 2022 Maundy coins, never changed or updated. Now then, moving on to the sixpence, a coin for which there was a new design released for the reign of Elizabeth II, and here it is. Designed by Edgar Fuller and Cecil Thomas, we see the 4 national flowers, the rose, thistle, leek and shamrock, all intertwined there in the middle, sort of linking together as the union of the United Kingdom. We have the legend Fid Def at the top, and then the word sixpence and the date to the bottom, giving the denomination and year it was made. As with all Elizabeth II pre-decimal coins that had the Mary Gillick portrait, her portrait was only updated on the later coins of decimal times, and of course, the 53 had the Brit on. Now then, moving on to the shilling, there are 2 types of reverse design for the shilling, both new designs for Elizabeth II's reign. Here is the new design for the English shilling. Notice it has a crowned shield, and within the shield there are 3 lions, the 3 lions of England, hence being an English shilling. The date either side, legend at the top, and denomination at the bottom. And this coin too was designed by William Gardner. The obverse, of course, featuring the portrait by Mary Gillick of the Queen, her young head portrait, and then later removing the Brit for these shillings. But there is a second design. Here we see a very similar design, but notice everything the same apart from the shield. Within the shield this time, rather than there being 3 lions, we have the rampant lion of Scotland. That is obviously the Scottish design. There were the Scottish and English designs of shilling, as there had been under the reign of George VI. That one was also designed by William Gardner, and of course has the same obverse designs of both the 53, the Brit and then the removal of the Brit after 1953 to onwards. Now then, moving up once again in denominations, we come to the florin, the 2 shilling coin. As we see on screen now, a new design released for the reign of Elizabeth II. A very detailed design here, lots of flowers. The massive central rose of England there is then surrounded by all the different flowers of the other countries, such as the thistle for Scotland, the leek for Wales, and the shamrock for Northern Ireland. The legend and date stuff goes around that. And then of course the obverse here now, a bigger portrait, but the usual Mary Gillick design with the Brit and no Brit versions of 53 and beyond. Now then, moving on to the half crown coin, we can see yet another new design for the reign of Elizabeth II and Elizabethan coins. We have here a quartered royal arms shield, crowned with the royal cipher either side, the ER for Elizabeth Regina, Elizabeth Queen, and then the date and legend around this design with 2 little sort of cross symbols there as well. And the obverse once again, as I'm sure you know by heart now, Brit on the 53 and no Brit on all the other coins afterwards. Now then, the largest of the silver coloured coins, the crown, the 5 shilling coin. There are 3 designs, starting off with this one. This is the 1953 design and has a special obverse for the coronation. The reverse here has the 4 national flowers and the 4 shields. We have 2 of them with the 3 lions of England, one with the lion rampant of Scotland and one with the harp of Ireland, and the date there is with the leek for Wales. Moving to the obverse, we see for once not a portrait of the Queen by Mary Gillick. This is a special portrait, as you can very well see, of the Queen on horseback. A very cool portrait to celebrate the coronation of the Queen that year. We can see though the addition of the words Brit at the top, which is very funny of course, as they're not on any others after 53. Here is the 1960 crown and has the same reverse design, with the 4 shields, the 4 national flowers about the central crown. Although the obverse now is no longer the special coronation year, just the usual year of Mary Gillick's portrait and the words 5 shillings for the denomination underneath, and no Brit on. The third and final design minted under pre-decimal Elizabeth II coins was the Churchill crown. Here we can see a portrait of Sir Winston Churchill here looking very stern and serious, and the word Churchill, his name, his surname, around the outside. This was released in 1965 to commemorate the life of Churchill, as he did sadly pass that year, and the legend around the top and the portrait of Elizabeth II in the middle by Mary Gillick are all very standard for these coins. Now then, on to gold coins. There were no half sovereigns made, and the gold coins weren't for circulation by then, as obviously there were just bullion coins released because the sovereign was worth now £3, 3 times the £1 face value. But in 1957, the return of the sovereign to bullion coins came, as there were in 57, 58, 59 and onwards, bullion sovereigns released for collectors to buy rather than being used in circulation, and all of these coins had the Mary Gillick portrait on, the only time for these few years of coins that would be struck within gold. Production started in 57, so there were no 53s with the Brit Om, and all have the same obverse design. So there we go. Decimalization was then to happen in 1971, putting an end to all these lovely pre-decimal coins. And so there we go. There is every single pre-decimal coin of the United Kingdom. And please do comment down below your favourite era of the UK's coinage. Please as well, of course, do subscribe to the channel if you learned something new and enjoyed. And of course, thank you for watching to the end, and we hope to see you again soon with some more coins in the future on Bits and Bobs. Bye for now.